accident occurred. Okay, before they even really knew what had happened. There were still people buried there. They were still trying to rescue people. They didn't know what was going on. But they already came up with, they already made up, for everybody who was buried there at the time and it was unaccounted for, they already drew up their accident reports. And here's what they put on them. If you look at here, they all stated this. And if you look down here, it says they all stated that the accident could not have been prevented, that the fatally injured did not blame anyone. They're dead, okay? But they did not blame anyone. And they actually got that on there. And that there was no negligence on the part of anyone. The answer was no negligence. Okay? So that's the first message that they're going to give out. And here's what they summed up the accident. You know, I put together, like I say, this 400 PowerPoint slides that would be here for the whole rest of till tomorrow morning going through those. They summed it up in just 22 words. And here's what they said. They said, what caused the accident? And it says, cave in from surface, filling the mine with sand and water, rising in the shaft to a point 185 feet from the surface. Okay, that was their accident investigation results. That's the same as answering the question, what caused this fatality, by saying, well, the cause was the big truck hit the little truck. It is. It's exactly that. And so on November 5th, just 2 days after the disaster, CCI's S.R. Elliott, he called a meeting together in Ishpeming, and he called together 24 mining industry representatives to review the cave-in. And really, this was a real butt-covering type of a meeting that was going to go on here, because ultimately, what all of these these mostly all superintendents of all the other mines around here, what they came up with was this. And this was their findings after meeting on this, essentially their investigation. And they said, from this inspection and study, it is our judgment that the mine was operated according to the best mining practices, and that all care possible was taken by the mining company to safeguard their employees, and that the accident was due to causes that could not have been foreseen. Now, as a safety person, that makes me want to barf, okay? Well, I gotta say it right now. And then November 7th, 1926, just 4 days after the disaster, Leslie Barrett, who is the state geologist down in Lansing, and he's also responsible for doing tax appraisals and other things at the mines in the Ishpeming area, he clears CCI completely. He says, this is the headlines in the Mining Journal. 4 days after the disaster, just think if you were a member of one of those families. CCI not to blame for disaster, Barrett. He publicly cleared CCI of any blame from the government, from the state government at the time, of any blame. And then a few days later, he wrote a memorandum. And I don't know if this was made public, but I ended up getting a copy of his private memorandum that he wrote, and that was probably just distributed to mining officials. And here's what he says. This was his general conclusion at the end. He says, the weight of evidence clearly indicates that the operating officials of the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company adopted every precaution to ensure safety of the operation of the Barnes-Hecker mine that their mining experience dictated. There is not one bit of evidence, which would point to negligence or gross carelessness in the management of this mine, and there is the strongest possible evidence that the most careful thought was given to the question of safety of operation. Okay, so that's his conclusion at that point. And then what the company did was they had what they call the Central Safety Committee, which was made up of all of the senior mine officials on the Market Iron Range, including the chairman of that was S.R. Elliott, and Charlie Stakel, who was the superintendent of the North Lake District, which was the Barnes-Hecker. He was on that committee. They classified it as a trade risk. Okay, they said, okay, everybody died as a result of the trade risk. That way they proclaimed that they themselves as a company had no control over the Barnes-Hecker mine cave-in. And this they did internally. So this wasn't even something that they said to the public. They said it to themselves, that this isn't our fault. This is a trade risk. And what a trade risk is, prior to the, I'm going to read this off. Prior to the enactment of the Michigan Workers' Compensation Act in 1912, assumption of risk or trade risk legally meant that by simply agreeing to work in a mine, the miner assumed any and all inherent risks that the job carried, and thus the mine owner was not liable for any injuries or death regardless of hazardous or unsafe conditions. Everybody signed up as an iron ore miner, you signed up for this.
Well, what kind of workman's comp is that?
Well, after the term trade risk was still being used in 1926 by the iron mining companies to absolve themselves of negligence or blame. So they still had to pay, after 1912, they still had to pay the workers' compensation, but they weren't legally responsible in a court of law. So that they couldn't be sued or anything like that, or looked down upon because someone did, because it's a trade risk. You took the job in an iron ore mine, you got killed. And it was that simple. But there were people who didn't agree with this, obviously. But the sad thing is that the people locally, the local state representative didn't do anything about it. But on January 13th, 1927, a House resolution was introduced by UP State Representative John Holland. He was from the Gogebic district. He was a Democrat from Bessemer, and he called for an investigation of the Barnes-Hecker mine disaster. So there was this public outcry. Let's go after it. We have to take a look at this. But, not being political here, but this might sound familiar. The Republican-led Michigan House of Representatives refused to even consider Holland's motion on the floor for immediate passage. Thus, the resolution calling for an investigation into the cause of the disaster was sent to committee, and it was never acted upon. There was no investigation. Then, on February 2nd, 1927, Marquette County Coroner's inquest into the deaths of the 10 Barnes-Hecker mine victims whose bodies were recovered was headed up by County Coroner William Prynne from Michigan, Prosecuting Attorney C.E. Locke, and CCI's Attorney Thomas Clancy. This inquest lasted just one day. No one was called to represent the Barnes-Hecker victims' families nor to testify on their behalf or on behalf of the iron ore miners. CCI's attorney, Thomas Clancy, and by the way, this full records of this, it was the Markham Regional History Center in their library has this record, and anybody can go there and actually get a copy of it, see all of the testimony. CCI's attorney, Thomas Clancy, asked the Cliffs Management Barnes-Hecker witnesses a total of 433 prepared questions, and it was yes, no, yes, so it was prepared. You could just see that coming from them. Marquette County's prosecuting attorney, C.E. Lott, he asked those same key witnesses a total of just 16 questions. Think about that. Now, some of the things that were said, and I know some of this is taken out of context in a sense, because I can't tell you everything that was said in their testimony, but some of the things that they said, it just blew me away at the time, because of what was going on. For example, S.R. Elliott, Assistant General Manager of CCI, now he was a mining engineer, he had 28 years experience. He was the person who laid out the Barnes-Hecker mine development and all of the drifts, in other words, all of the underground workings, he's the one who designed it. He planned out all of the sub-levels above level 1 where the cave-in occurred. Okay, so this was really his doing. He's the one who planned this all. And here's just some of the outtakes that he said, just matter-of-factly. He said, this entire area is like a giant sponge. When we drove drifts in there, we found a great deal of water. We had to drain a tremendous area. In other words, there was a tremendous sponge all around these drifts. He said, and here he says this, we expected in time that the surface would break and that the water would come in, some water, but no one ever dreamed for 1 second that when the surface did break, that the whole mine within 15 minutes could be flooded. Imagine that. Yeah, we know it was going to cave in. We were just hoping it wouldn't cave in when we were down there, is what he was saying. And here's what he said, too. He says, naturally, we never had anything to fear at all. We never dreamed that anything like this could happen. It is simply beyond me. I can't comprehend it. As a mining engineer with 28 years experience. Think about that. Charlie Stakel, CCI superintendent of the Barnes-Hecker mine, mining engineer for 21 years. Here's a couple of his statements. The last time I went in there before it came down, and he was talking about the worked out sub-levels above level 1 where the cave-in occurred, we had great difficulty in getting in that place because of the pressure. And we had to crawl through a small opening to get into the drifts where the men were working. Doesn't sound good. Mr. Lotz, the prosecuting attorney, had one question for Stakel. He said, can you express your opinion as to the cause of the accident? And the guy with 21 years experience as a mine engineer, he says, I can't conceive of how it happened. I can't imagine how it happened. To me, it is practically a mystery. I can't explain it. No, because I can't imagine any plausible explanation for it. Get it? We put Leslie Barrett up there. He gets called in. He gets called into the inquest. with some interesting testimony. When he was asked by CCI attorney Clancy if he was familiar with the development of the Barnes-Hecker mine, he said, "From the start, yes." When asked if he was familiar with the operation of the Barnes-Hecker mine, "Yes, sir." When asked if he was familiar with the mine's underground mappings, "Discussed it many times with their officials," his direct quote. When asked if he was knowledgeable of the Barnes-Hecker ore body and the problems of mining it, "Very, very much," he said. When then asked if there was anything that CCI could have done to ensure safety in mining its property, his answer was one word: no. Now, get a load of this. County prosecutor asked him one question: "Did you ever personally visit the underground workings of this mine?" Mr. Barrett: "Never, in the Barnes-Hecker." He'd never even been in the mine. Excuse me if I sound a little emotional here. I can't believe this stuff. So the county coroner's inquest ruled. They came back with an open verdict. They said the deceased met their deaths in the Barnes-Hecker mine by a cave-in, the cause of which is unknown. And in 1926, really, which tells you a lot about what Cleveland Cliffs was thinking and their senior management group. This is from Conover, head of safety now for Cleveland Cliffs, 1926. Here's what he wrote internally. This is what's in the reports. "While this accident thrust a heavy burden upon this company, it would have been felt more severely if it had been subjected to criticism. Opinion is unanimous in holding that there is no negligence in the operation of the Barnes-Hecker mine and that the accident was unavoidable." Okay? Now, think about this, because I want to tell you something that boils my blood. By concluding that the Barnes-Hecker mine disaster was a trade risk that was unavoidable, CCI recorded for history that their 50 employees were killed because they themselves took the job, and in doing so, they themselves assumed any and all risk of death in that mine. As such, it was each miner's own fault that they were killed at the Barnes-Hecker mine. Unavoidable. So, then I started thinking, okay, so why did the cave-in occur here? And how did 51 men die if this was unavoidable? And so again, I went back to the Cliffs, to our safety analysis, accident investigation. The 6 steps are pretty simple. You get the facts, and you get the actual facts and examine them. You determine immediate and basic causes, and then what we would do is you eliminate those causes on a mine level. That's what we would have done. But I had to go through these first 2, get the facts, examine them, and determine the basic causes. And so I had to try to figure out, well, what causes underground mine cave-ins and ground subsidence? Now, I grew up in Nagani. I grew up on Indiana Street. I was surrounded by caving grounds, by mine shafts, by old mines, okay, by cave-ins. I see them to this day. I see them all the time living in Nagani. This is the cave-in that occurred right on Iron Street. Some of you might remember when this thing happened. Now, the Barnes-Hecker mine was a very specific kind of a cave-in. There's different kinds of cave-ins as ground subsides as I studied this. But the Barnes-Hecker mine was what they call a rapid collapse sinkhole cave-in. Very specific type of a cave-in, very common type of a cave-in, particularly when you're using that method of mining. And so, but what I did was, I just really did some research. And again, I can't go through all of just to give you an idea of some of the research. And to be honest with you, too, was one of the greatest things about doing research is it's called Google. Ever hear of it? and you can Google anything, and all these things show up. And I was so amazed at how whenever I Googled anything dealing with you think, well, what's going to be on the internet involving cave-ins? Oh, try it. You got to see it to believe it. And so there was a lot of really important papers, and I studied these papers to see exactly what causes subsidence. And really what I wanted to know was, because there's different kinds of cave-ins, what causes rapid collapse sinkholes, okay? And now, one of the things that I found out was that, I don't want to say it's not rocket science, because it's not rocket science, but it's geological science, but it's pretty simple. It's not like there's 1,000 different things that are going to happen. It's not like there's even 10. There's actually only a few things that are going to cause a rapid collapse sinkhole, okay? And it's most affected, and of course there's any combination thereof of certain things that are going to happen. But what I found was that that type of subsidence, there's 3 things that have to be happening essentially for what happened at the Barnes-Hecker to happen. Number one is things that it's going to be affected by is, and some of this is pretty obvious when you look at this, the geological strength and competency of the ore and surrounding rock, that including inclusions of faults, joints, and fractures, combined with the overburden's thickness and makeup. In other words, the geological makeup, okay? No kidding. And then, one that kind of surprised me was the amounts of surface and groundwater. That one is extremely important. And of course, and when you take in this hydrologic and geological considerations, it's the mining method that is then used in spite of what's going on, okay? And so it's actually pretty simple to follow, but it takes a lot of time to do it. And so let's look at geological strength and competency of the ore surrounding Barnes-Hecker rock and iron ore, including inclusions, faults, and fractures, combined with the overburden's thickness and makeup. Now, one of the things that as I was doing the study, I'm going to read a couple of these things. I got a lot of this evidence, a lot of this information on the full report, but I'll just summarize some of this stuff. This is from one of the hard rock mining papers. Listen to this. The mine roof and floor are critical factors in the initiation of subsidence since they propagate from these areas. Makes sense? Weak roof materials permit the fall of overlying strata and compact more easily, resulting in a greater likelihood of and severity of subsidence. Well, it makes sense. If the ground is weak, it's more likely to cave in, okay? And that's all what they're saying. And then, so I started looking at, okay, well, after looking at that particular set of cause of ground subsidence, I started looking back at the evidence. And one of the things I got, this was from the Barnes-Hecker mine disaster. It's a paper written by Gardner Wahlberg many years ago. And this was his remembrances of the cave-in. This was from first-hand accounts from his father, John Wahlberg, and he was John's brother-in-laws were Bill Albert and Walter Paquette, whose names are very familiar with us who know that what happened at the Barnes-Hecker. William and Walter were two of the victims. Here's what he wrote. He says, in the early 1900s, I worked on a diamond drill explorations all over that region from North Lake to Dexter, and that's the Barnes-Hecker location. During these operations, we found an average of 100 to 200 feet of overburden, which is a lot. That is gravel and sand and boulders over the so-called ledge. We found it difficult to drill holes in the ledge, and it appears to be broken ground. We had to install casing, standpipe in the drill holes to enable us to drill. Okay, so that's telling you right there. Well, they already know ahead of time that the ground's broken ground in that area. The geology is not very good. And then this is from, I just started pulling up the archives. I thought, okay, what did CCI actually say in their archives? And I actually went back to 1914, the geology department report on the exploratory drilling near the west end of North Lake, and that's on the Barnes-Hecker lease. So this is where the Barnes-Hecker mine was located. And he said this, they said, the jasper in the vicinity is hard and badly broken, so that trouble with caving ground was encountered in practically every hole, and most of them had to be reamed for the greater part of their depth. So they already start talking about this. Now, CCI also encountered a very serious problem determining the location of where the main shaft was in relation to where the ore body was. And that's because above the ore body, there was that over 200 feet of overburden, of sand, of wet sand, okay? So you couldn't sink a shaft in that wet sand. So they had to move a third of a mile to the northwest, and they found ledge. They finally found where they could get ledge. That's where they put the shaft, and that's why people that go to the site today, you'll see where the memorial is, but then you got to walk all the way through the woods to see where the cave-in actually occurred. It's because that's where they were mining. They were that far away because of the overburden and the broken up ground. Okay, and they thought that that's what we're going to have to do. So they put the shaft in here, went all the way over here to get to that ore body. Now, some of the other records. Here's 1918 internal report. At the close of last year, 1917, we had just succeeded in anchoring the shaft at 60 feet in solid ledge after passing through quicksand and broken ground. In January month, the shaft was concreted from this point to the surface in order to shut off the heavy flow of water coming in through large crevices in the rock. Okay, the shaft was allowed to fill with water. Sinking was then discontinued until the head frame could be erected, and it was again started on April 15th when the shaft was pumped out. It was found that the concrete had not set at points, and the shaft was making considerable water. Now, here's another from one of the other reports. This is slope stability, triggering events, mass movement hazards. And here's what they said in this particular paper here. 2013. It says, some rocks are stronger than others. Yep, you know that. If a weak rock formation occurs between stronger rocks, the weak layer will be the most likely place for a failure to occur. Again, not rocket science, okay? Especially if the geological layers dip. In other words, they're not sitting flat, but they're dipped in a downward direction. It says also joints, faults, and fractures contribute to weakened rock planes that can create a slip surface. Again, particularly if the rock formation dips in a downward direction. Triggering events or shocks such as human-made explosions may trigger sudden instability. This is the Barnes-Hecker ore body. A lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know this till I started looking at the records. I always thought ore of your body, as you go down, it's going to be like this, not the Barnes-Hecker. It's what's known as a steeply inclined ore body. It's sitting like this, okay? It's going all the way up to the surface. It's got a pitch 60 degrees to the north and 80 degrees to the south, so it would look something like this. And the thing to watch out for is that this ore body was relatively thin. Okay, it actually was thin, and so there was these faults or dike lines would be bordering both sides of that particular ore body, which you just heard also adds to the danger. So you not only got because everything is sitting like this. And of course, really ultimately the cause of subsidence or caving is gravity, right? Because everything's trying to go to the center of the earth. And if you got something that's sitting like this, well, the chances of it caving around it are pretty slim. But if you got something like this, it's going to slide. That's what happens. Now, early geological mapping, did CCI know about this? Darn right they did. It shows up in their maps. Early geological mapping shows that CCI was well aware of these vertical dikes and or fault planes on the footwall side of this vertical ore body. They actually drew them on their maps, okay? So they knew about it. Now, here's another very important and a very major danger warning sign. This, again, is from the paper that Gardner Wahlberg wrote. And I want to read this. He says, here's another factor that contributed to the disaster. Now, anybody who was an underground miner, I don't know if there's anybody here who may have been that, might have been. Oh, right there, there's one. There you go. Listen to this. Here's another factor that contributed to the disaster. During the time they were mining the top sublevel above first level, they had several bad sand runs. That is, sand was working its way into the mine. These sand runs were successfully sealed with many bales of straw and bran. The cause of the sand run came from the so-called ore run. That is a steady stream of good ore that would run like water from above, and only God knows from where. The ore would run directly into the chutes, and the miners would scoop it up with a shovel. That was a miner's bonanza, cheap way to get ore without any effort. I was told by good authority that they had such runs at times. The proper procedure would be to seal out this ore run immediately for safety's sake. That is the reason they cease mining operations at the top sublevel at certain height, so they won't rob too much of the overburden. These so-called ore runs can penetrate to one side or far beyond. Now, in other words, what he was telling you was that in the first two sublevels that were put in on the west end of the ore body, when they put them sublevels in there, and they're going in there, they're mining those cuts out, they had sand and water coming in from the surface. It was sand that would come down, the ore would run down all wet, but all of a sudden there'd be sand coming in from the surface. That's telling you something bad is happening. Now, here again, the Central Peninsula NMU archives, they recorded some real important information here. This was from Peter Monjet Jr. And his father, Pete Monjet, was a pump man at the mine who was killed that day. And Pete Monjet Jr. recorded how his father, Peter Sr., would talk to his family about the water flows in the mine and about surface loam dirt and surface sand would run into the underground workings. He talked about how his dad and other miners had to block the raises with straw to help control dangerous mud runs that were coming in steady from the surface. Okay. Now, did CCI know about this? Well, of course they did. It was their mine. And this is from the 1923 annual report, first level. Two gangs have been slicing into the west ore lands above this level on the 1,100-foot elevation and have dropped down and are now on the second slice, okay, second sublevel. This ground stands vertical. It is very heavy, and a number of runs have been experienced. We expect to get away from this trouble as soon as we get a good job started. So they knew about it, okay? They talked about it. And one of the things that, this is, again, from Conover's safety department, Barnes-Hecker report, internal report here in the archives. He says due to excessive crushing, the first sublevel collapsed before the ore was mined, and it was necessary to open it. In other words, when they put the first sublevel in it, it collapsed, it caved in already, okay? Now, here's a couple other things that were said under oath. I'll read this. CCI admitted under oath that there were visible heavy vertical crushing and lateral pressures exhibited in the mine sublevels in the direct area of the cave-in. Mining at the Barnes-Hecker continued nonetheless. And this is one of the things that Charlie Staples said. He said, the last time I went in there, before it came down, I already read that one. Okay, that's what he talks about, the going in, crawling through the small opening. And then, also during the coroner's inquest, Conover said, I also observed that the heavy weight from the timbers were taking weight in the same area where the cave-in occurred, that there must have been a considerable load. So they know that there's something happening. So here's a fact. This is what I found when I looked at the evidence. What the personal historical accounts and official CCI records indicate is that management at the Barnes-Hecker, right from the start of mining the West End ore body, was aware of, number one, the not competent nature of the heavy vertical soft hematite ore deposit. They knew that, they're mining it. The weak fractured nature of the overlying strata and surrounding rock that was cracked and so on. In the presence of an immediate footwall dike fault lines. They knew those fault lines were there, they were also vertical. Also, the well-documented ore and sand runs serve as further evidence that the mine management was fully aware of the potentially deadly connections in the porous rock strata between the ore body's top sublevels and the 200 feet drenched layer of surface sand and gravel that sat directly overhead. In other words, there was a direct connection. There was cracks, there was crevices, bugs, if you want to call them that. It's one of the things that they call them. That there was a direct connection, so that's telling you that there's really something geologically poor going on. So, first immediate cause, as a result of that particular effort, was one of the immediate causes was a substandard condition caused by the poor supportive geological strength of the vertical iron ore formation and the surrounding underground rock formations at the Barnes-Hecker mine. Barnes-Hecker mine site area's underground footwall and hanging wall of Siamo slate rock and the mine's west level 1 not competent, not supportive, roof and floor jasper soft hematite iron ore formation were well known to mine officials. Of course they were. CCI documented the presence of widespread geological structural weaknesses, including not only fissures, joints, faults, bugs, and fractures, but also alarming runs of sand directly into the mining areas. Such known geological inconsistencies in the overlying surrounding strata were critical factors that contributed to the likelihood of subsidence and its potential severity. Mining at the Barnes-Hecker mine continued nonetheless. Okay? Now, here's another major cause. Let's talk about this one. Major cause of underground mining surface subsidence, sinkhole subsidence. Subsidence is affected by the amount of underground and surface water and or its removal for mining purposes. What I read, this is what I found out. The creation of a cavity as a result of mining results in subsidence. If you mine it out, something's going to happen. But another mine-related phenomena that also creates subsidence is the withdrawal of water to facilitate underground mining. Water withdrawal also causes the formation of cavities, bugs which were once filled with water, and like cavities directly created by the mining, may result in subsidence as the hydrogeological properties of the associated strata are changed. Okay? Now, question. Was there excessive groundwater in the Barnes-Hecker mine? Well, again, it went right to the official reports. 1920 drifting report, CCI. During the first few months of the year, remarkable progress was made in drifting. In other words, trying to put the tunnels towards the ore body. This could not be kept up as most of the best men left us, and it has been difficult to keep good men at this work ever since, especially since we struck the heavy flow of water on each level. First level. This opening has reached a distance of 1,629 feet from the shaft and is now in the iron formation. 2 horizontal diamond drill holes were put in from this drift. Drilling was slow and expensive due to the broken up character of the ground again and the large amount of water encountered. Listen to this. A pressure of 250 pounds was noted on drill hole number 1. I think we'd be standing in front of that. In other words, they put the drill hole in and the water's coming out, 250 pounds of pressure. That's like a fire. That's worse than a fire hose from the fire department. Here's what they say, second level. This level is in a distance of 1,856 feet from the shaft. On September 9th, just as we apparently hit the ore contact, again, a tremendous flow of water was encountered and we were compelled to dam off this level as no progress could be made. No work has since been on this elevation. Third level, this opening is in a total of 2,038 feet from the shaft, and some ore has shown up on one side of the drift. We have encountered a heavy flow of water on this level also, and slow progress is being made. So they're in a body of water that's underground essentially. The water problem, this 1920 report, general report, water problem at this property is proving a serious one. Heavy flows are encountered on all three levels. One level is idle due to damming off of the water, and very slow progress is being made on the other two levels. We are planning a diversion ditch to carry the water we are pumping together with the natural drainage in this territory around the North Lake into the Carp River, and it is possible we may have to unwater the lake before much of the mining can be done. And then here you go, 1921. This is again in their annual, 1921. Your annual reports are missing out of the archives here. So I jumped up to 1922, and it says all work has been discontinued at this property except pumping between February and December due to excessive water flow in the mine. Okay. So CCI's annual reports that they began pumping out, then they began to pump out North Lake. They said, well, let's just get rid of the lake that's sitting over here. The ore body's over here, here's North Lake. So they said, well, let's get rid of that surface water. And also there was a pretty large pond that sits just south of the ore body. And they decided that what they would do is drain those surface water bodies in hopes of stopping some of the water that would be seeping down underground into the mines. 1922, first level. When operations were resumed on this level, a large amount of water was making in the main level breast, and it was decided to start a new drift back to the footwall and drive east around the water area. Later on, the water in the main south drift drained to such an extent that operations were resumed here also, and the level extended east. This is the area that caves in, right here. They're talking about the area, when they say about this area right here where they went around it to start with, and then they went back into it, that's what caves in. Okay. How much water was there? Well, CCI records again. Every annual report tells you how much water they're pumping out of the mine. I was amazed at what the records told me. How much water are they actually pumping out? 1921, they pumped 585 million gallons of water out of the mine. 1922, 549 million gallons. Started dropping off here about 390 million, 323 million. 1925, 375 million. And then 1926, in the 10 months that they operated, there was 293 million gallons of water. That's 2.5 billion gallons of water that was pumped out of the mine, okay, from underground. Ever been to Las Vegas? Ever go to Bellagio? Well, that's 114 Bellagio fountains, lake levels, okay? You can consider that. That's how much water that is. If you took that water that was pumped out of the ground and put it on the surface of where that is, and put it there at one time, it would be a 40-acre lake that would be 19 feet deep. Okay? That doesn't include the surface water that was pumped and drained from North Lake or the ponds. Okay? That's just the water that was pumped from underground. And in 1925, their pumping expense account annual report, water from underground steadily decreased until this past year when mining operations caused the hanging to cave. And this was in 1925. In other words, the hanging to cave and crack at various points, permitting water to seep into the mine. If we're talking about the hanging, of course, we're talking about what's above you. Things are starting to cave and let go. And they can see it. They actually talk about it. Now, why so much water? Why was there so much water at the Barnes-Hecker? Well, hit the jackpot on this one. It was in doing my research. I came across this on the internet, and it's a Michigan Department of Conservation. It's a geological survey. And you'll see right here, it says Technical Report Number 3, Groundwater Investigations of the Marquette Iron Mining District, 1954. I thought, oh, wow, you gotta be kidding. It's a detailed report on groundwater investigations around all of the mines, okay? Now, of course, the Barnes-Hecker mine had already caved in, but they talked a lot about the Barnes-Hecker mine location. And here's a fact. Here's what that study told me, and it explains why there's so much water there. The Barnes-Hecker soft ore body lies within a high-yield underground water aquifer. It is located directly in the highly saturated headwater zone of the Carp River. In other words, you couldn't have picked a worse place to put an underground iron ore mine. You'd been better off throwing a dart at a target and hitting something and putting it there than putting it here. And that's down in the mine, all that water. Now there's also this 206 feet of saturated sand and gravel overburden sitting on the surface, over 200 feet of it. And that's documented by CCI because like, when they're drilling records, diamond drill hole number 82 documents that. Tells you how much, what was there. Now why does that matter? Why does it matter that there's all of this, this outwash, this over 200 feet of this over the Barnes-Hecker location? Well, here's one of the reasons that it's important. This again is from Underground Hard Rock Mining, Subsidence and Hydrologic Environmental Impacts. That's another paper. It says, surface and near water soils and unconsolidated materials tend to emphasize subsidence effects because they behave in an inconsistent manner. They are an important factor relative to hydrologic impacts because they affect the exchange of surface water and groundwater. Okay? So you got a problem because you got that 200 feet of water-drenched soil. No. Underneath that, to the first sublevel here, to the top sublevel, you've got 210 feet now of cracked rock ledge. Okay, we know there's cracks, there's bugs, there's everything else occurring in that. Okay, now why does that matter? Well, in terms of water. Okay, why does that matter in terms of water? Here's what the technical report says. Most of the subsurface water is contained in the zone of saturation. This is a natural water reservoir formed in the innumerable interstices of both unconsolidated deposits, such as sand and gravel, which we talked about, and in the openings of consolidated formations in that rock formation. In the consolidated rocks, such as slates, iron-bearing formations, and quartzites, some water occurs in the minute crevices between the crystalline grains, but the portion of the greatest importance to mining occurs in vugs and fractures, particularly joints and openings along bedding planes. Now, think back to what we talked about, the geology of that area. So, here again, here's another immediate cause. I'll read through this. One of the immediate causes was a substandard condition caused by the excessive amounts of surface and groundwater present at the Barnes-Hecker mine site, plus that water's removal during the mining process. There were known prodigious amounts of surface and problem groundwater at the Barnes-Hecker mine as documented in CCI's annual mine reports. Barnes-Hecker mine underground workings were in fact planned and undertaken by CCI within the water-saturated headwater zone of the Carp River, including a surface creek and swamp area, North Lake, plus both an underground high-yield overburden sand gravel aquifer some 200 feet thick that sat on top of ledge, and an underground high-water yield fractured rock aquifer in which sat the soft hematite ore body that was mined. Local rock formations would have been weakened by such saturation. Okay? CCI's annual reports documented that billions of gallons of surface and groundwater were eventually pumped and removed from the Barnes-Hecker mine site prior to November 3rd, 1926 cave-in. Withdrawal of groundwater in the mine itself would have caused additional numerous open underground cavities, such as bugs and fractures that were once filled with water, as reported, and thus led to additional strata weaknesses as the hydrogeological properties of the associated rock and ore strata were changed. Okay? Surface water thus migrated more easily into the fractures and fissures in the strata of the mine, thus further contributing to the probability of a catastrophic subsidence due to mining. Mining at the Barnes-Hecker mine continued nonetheless. Okay, let's look at this one. Subsidence is affected by the mining method. Okay, and this is I did a lot of research on this. Every paper tells you the same thing, that a mining plan should anticipate magnitude, location, timing of surface balance. So how are you mining the iron ore? Particularly when you consider the geological and hydrological conditions. Okay, now I hit the jackpot on this as well. This was a highly detailed U.S. government 1929 report on the study of the causes of underground mine cave-ins in the Upper Peninsula. It was called Subsidence and Ground Movement in the Copper and Iron Mines of the Upper Peninsula, Michigan. So this was put out. This paper was put together just after the Barnes-Hecker mine disaster. Okay, and surprise, surprise, on page 40 of this 1929 report, there's a picture of the Barnes-Hecker mine cave-in. Oh, that's amazing. And the reason is because guess who was one of the co-authors? Guess who was one of the contributors? S.R. Elliott, general manager of Cleveland Cliffs Mine. He was one of them, including several other people who were involved in that November 5th on-site, essentially, investigation of the mine site. These are the same people. And here's their opening paragraph. It says this: the failure of support and the breaking down of superimposed rock masses, often reaching to the surface, are phenomena closely associated with mining. Yep. Certain types of ore bodies and enclosing rocks are more subject to disturbance than others due to conditions of occurrence. Yep, just talked about it. But the method of mining are probably more largely responsible responsible for extensive failure, as for instance, where caving is employed and collapse of the top rock follows. No, the caving and top slicing method is what they were doing. And I could read this to you, because anybody here, it's pretty simple. What they're doing is that they're drifting over to the iron ore body, they're going up in a raise, and then they're putting in sublevels into the ore. And you start at the top and you work your way down. You blast that rock, down it comes. And then you go down, you go down underneath that, okay? It's called the caving method. Here's a good diagram that shows you exactly what they were doing at the Barnes-Hecker. And it was a common practice back then. Common but very deadly practice. And if you were here for 4 hours, you'd hear the statistics on that, but I can't do it tonight. But here, what they do is they come up with the raise, say over here, this would be a raise that's coming up, ore body sitting in here, they put it a sub-level and they blast it. And of course, this ore comes down, they mine that ore out, they take that ore, drag it out, put it down here, then they go up to the next sub-level, they keep blasting it. So everything's caving. Everything's coming down on top of them, okay? And eventually what happens is that in almost all cases when you're using the caving method, it's going to cause a surface cave-in, okay? But let's just hope it doesn't happen when we're mining there, as Elliot said. And so, here again, this is the cave mining techniques. I'm just going to read this real quick. Caving mining systems refers to all underground mining techniques in which the ore body is undercut and drilled beneath the surface and is recovered as it falls, okay? The removal of the ore causes a large gap or cave where the ore body previously resided. The limitations are this. An important issue associated with cave mining is that it can make the overlying ground very unstable and can result in surface subsidence. The magnitude of subsidence is dependent on the exact mining techniques implemented, the original topography, and the integrity of the overlying substrate. We talked about that. Potential for these techniques to destroy an entire mine, put the mine workers in danger, and severely impact the local environment ecosystems are serious concerns that must be evaluated prior to beginning a cave mining project. Okay. And again, I go back to what Elliot said in the coroner's inquest. He said, we expected in time that the surface would break, and that the water would come in, some water, but no one ever dreamed for 1 second that when the surface did break, that the whole mine within 50 minutes would be flooded, and that 51 men would die. Okay? Now here's another fact in regards to that. The void that's created in the mined out west area above level 1, where it caved in, that caused, in other words, as they mine this out, you're collapsing this, and you only got like 200 feet of rock here. And above that, you got this water-drenched overburden here. As you're collapsing this, well, this is coming down, right? So it's getting closer and closer. Now anyway, the void created in the mined out west area above level 1 caused significant changes in the in-situ stress field and resulted in further weakening of all the surrounding rocks. As the total mined out area was filled primarily with caving overlying materials, which as it came down, the roof and wall strata was weakened and collapsed further, contributing to the likelihood of a catastrophic subsidence event at the Barnes-Hecker mine from this wet surface overburden that sits right there as this is coming down. Okay, so here we go. What are the immediate causes? Other immediate cause was a substandard practice, namely the underground mining method that was being used at the Barnes-Hecker mine, despite the known local hydrologic and geological ground conditions. The caving top slicing method of mining utilized at the Barnes-Hecker was and is known under the best of conditions to be the most likely method of underground mining to cause subsidence. Caving method. Caving top slicing method was in fact expected by Cleveland-Cliffs senior mine management to result in future surface subsidence at the Barnes-Hecker mine from above and into the mined out areas. Under sworn testimony. Previous to November 3rd, 1926 on the Market Iron Range, this common method of mining had already resulted in multitude spontaneous mine cave-ins and falls of ground that resulted in the deaths of dozens of iron ore miners. Mining at the Barnes-Hecker continued nonetheless. And if anybody here has ever done any research on the mines in the Megani area that were using that particular method, you would know, like say for example, the Megani mine caved in, killed 10 miners, caved in at lunchtime, when there was over 70 miners underground mining that day. Everybody came to the surface except the top men stayed below and a couple other guys. Mine caved in at lunchtime. It would have been worse than this, using the same mining method. Now, here comes another immediate cause. Things aren't bad enough. It was the extremely wet late summer and fall of 1926. In their annual report, 1926, they say, the year 1926 was marked by heavy precipitation. Now, what is that? How much rain did they get back then? Well, I asked the expert. I went to Carl Bonack and I said, Carl, in your records, can you tell me how much it rained in 1926 in fall? And he actually had the answers. And he says, yeah, this is what he sent me. He said, the latter portion of the summer and early fall of 1926 was wet in Marquette County. July had 4.46 inches, which ran in excess of about 1.3 above average. August 3.33 was almost a half inch above average, but September was really wet. U.S. Weather Bureau in Marquette had 6.5 nearly inches of rain, nearly 3 inches above average. October had average rainfall. Think about that. That's a lot of rain. 6.5 inches of rain in October. Now, why does that matter? Well, here we go. I researched that. Water plays an important role as a transporting medium in mass ground movement processes. Addition of water from rainfall, snowmelt adds weight to the surface soils and subsurface geological deposits as it seeps into the soil and rock, replacing the air in the pore spaces and in fractures. Makes sense. Since water is heavier than air, this increases the weight of the soil and rock. Weight is force and force is stress. As the gravitational stress increases, so do the chances of a mass ground movement. Okay, couldn't have been worse. And then there's another one here. Drainage gradients may be altered by the disturbance of the strata around mine areas. Rocks may become weakened by saturation, and erosion patterns could change. Where surface water is present, it may migrate more easily into the fractures and fissures, into the strata, and into the mine, and may induce subsidence. So everything's pointing to it. And again, if you go back to Gardner Wahlberg, he talked about it too. He says another factor that contributed to the disaster was the extremely wet fall of 1926. It rained and rained day after day. The ground was saturated. Small streams were overflowing. It was only a rivulet became a raging torrent. While this was going on, the rainwater seeped through the broken ground formation surrounding the mine area. So another immediate cause was the substandard condition caused by the well-documented extremely heavy July, August, September 1926 rainfalls that caused excessive amounts of additional water to flow into the local Barnes-Hecker Minecart River headwater zone in the fall of 1926, leading to a heavy recharge of the Barnes-Hecker mine area aquifer, which in turn highly amplified the risk of more water coming into the mine through crevices, etc., and or through a surface cave-in. Also, the added weight and compression due to the additional heavy water saturation of the known 200 feet of overlying sand and gravel directly above the level 1 west end ore workings contributed to increased vertical and horizontal pressures upon the subsidence, already caving and fractured areas above and surrounding the mined out sublevels. Okay? It couldn't be worse conditions. Mining at the Barnes-Hecker mine continued nonetheless. The trap was set. It couldn't have been worse conditions at all. And then, boom, November 3rd, 1926, they're done mining here, but they decide they're going to mine right underneath that level. A blast goes off right here at 11:20. Down it comes. 51 men are dead. Now here's a fact. The vast majority of the 52 men still working underground at 11:20, a couple of the guys that come to surface, November 3rd, were not working in that direct vicinity of the cave. Most all the miners were working to the east of that, these other mining areas. Here's another fact. When that cave-in occurs, everyone underground scrambles, runs, or climbs for their lives. So why did only one miner escape? And why did 51 die? And that only one miner, it was a miracle. He climbed 800 feet in 15 minutes. I can't drive 800 feet in 15 minutes. It's like, but he actually did it. And about everyone else was killed. And why was the body of only one of the 29 contract miners, the guys that were actually still there doing the mining, that were still in all of these sublevels, only one contract miner's body was recovered in this so-called escape route? I'll tell you why. There's an answer. Here again, I started doing some research on escape routes. When an underground mine disaster occurs, to lessen the loss of life by improving the survival chances of the trapped miners, safe escape routes must be planned and provided so that they can be found quickly and successfully utilized by the miners as a life-saving getaway. No kidding, man. Careful risk assessment is absolutely necessary to ensure that life-saving underground escape routes are designed into the mine plan. Determining optimal escape routes is one of the most important factors for safety of miners in emergency cases, okay? And so here's a historical fact. There were no safe routes for the Barnes-Hecker miners to escape. If they were working in this area, and if anything happens, they can climb all the way out of that mine, up that ladder, Or they can go all the way over here, and they actually put in a secondary, what they called an escape route. It was established in 1923, down all the way down on level 3. As you go down a raise, it's connected to the barns, to the level 6 of the Morris mine. And what that is for this right here, so you got this escape route over here, and that escape route is right there. It's that little dot right there, okay? If you want to go up that thing. But everybody's working over here, and so you're actually 2,000 or 2,200 feet from this level, from the here at the bottom of the raise to get to this particular thing. That's how far. Like if say for example the guys that were here, and there were some people that were here, if they decided, well, I can't climb that ladder, but I can get to this. You got to run. You got to run 2,200 feet. That's a long ways to go when the water's licking in the rear end. That connecting raise, when you get to that raise, it goes down 200 feet at a 45-degree angle. Imagine falling down that thing as you're trying to run. 45-degree angle, goes down 200 feet. And once you get to the bottom of that, over here, you got to go 1.3 miles, run 1.3 miles to the Morris Mine shaft. That's their escape routes. Here's a fact. The Barnes-Hecker mine was a death trap in the event of a rapid collapse sinkhole caving. There was no way out of that mine, and that was proven. You couldn't do it. So one of the immediate causes, again, was a substandard condition in practice, namely the lack of a safe underground escape system at the Barnes-Hecker mine, as indicated by the deaths of 51 of 52 men underground at the time of the Barnes-Hecker mine cave-in, who failed to escape with their lives. The November 3rd, 1926 in-place mine emergency escape system that included the main shaft's vertical 1,000-foot ladderway and the mine's third-level raised connection to the Morris Mine 6th level proved to be wholly inadequate. Of course, that's proof. As such, CCI's underground miner emergency escape practices were deficient. So, those are them. Those are the immediate causes. Okay, I'm just very briefly here. This is sort of summarizes them. Number one, substandard geological conditions caused by the poor supportive strength of the vertical Barnes-Hecker or soft ore body, combined with the widespread geological weaknesses of the surrounding rock formation, plus the vast thickness and makeup of the surface overburden. Number two, substandard hydrologic conditions caused by the excessive amounts of surrounding ground and surface water. Number three, the caving top slicing mining method being used in spite of the known substandard geological and hydrological conditions. And number four, the addition of another substandard condition caused by the extremely heavy July, August, September rainfalls. And then finally, the substandard condition caused by the wholly inadequate underground escape system at the Barnes-Hecker mine in case of a surface cave-in. So, concluding this here, in spite of these highly potential dangers known to the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company, why did mining continue there? In other words, this was the loss, this is the incident, these were talking about the immediate causes. What were the basic causes? What were the personal and job system factors that led to this lack of control, this inadequate systems and compliance? And that's what, again, and this again is the Cleveland Cliffs model of doing incident analysis, okay, using their own analysis. And again, a basic cause, we're looking at a basic or root cause. It's the underlying reason for the immediate cause. It's the reason that the unsafe conditions were not recognized, prevented, or controlled, and the reason that the activity or series of events became hazardous. And by the way, this is from a PowerPoint that I put together when we were training our supervisors on how to go about doing this particular analysis. I just go right back and did it, and so I just went right back to. So what I did was I went right back to the standards guidelines that I put together, and I went through all of our. We listed a whole listing of what we call basic causes that the supervisors and the managers could pick from as they were trying to identify what were the system issues that caused it. So without getting into a lot of detail on these are the 10 basic causes why those other things were allowed to be and why they continued to mine. And this is right from Cleveland Cliffs, right from their own investigation system. Inadequate engineering and geological standards and design criteria. Inadequate engineering monitoring and evaluation of mine construction. Inadequate engineering and geological evaluation of changes. Inadequate engineering and geological assessment of loss exposures. Inadequate engineering and geological work planning. Inadequate engineering assessment of human factors. And then there was the inadequate mine management policies, procedures, and practices. Inadequate mine management assessment of needs and risks. Inadequate mine management development of standards for monitoring procedures and practices. and inadequate mine management development of standards for evaluation of exposures. And so those 10 basic causes explain that lack of control by the Barnes-Hecker mine management to properly address the potentially deadly conditions, why they engaged in substandard mine safety practices that eventually did lead to the deaths of 51 men. So if you follow these dominoes that go back this way, you start here, you light up the dominoes and you tip them and there they go. And that's pretty much it. So in essence, the primary cause, in summary, of the November 3rd, 1926 disaster that took the lives of the 50 underground CCI iron ore miners and our Marquette County mine inspector was the 1926, I want to stress that, mining, engineering, geological, and safety practices of the owners and managers and operators of the Barnes-Hecker mine. Cleveland Iron Company at that time lacked the necessary management controls that would have prevented the disaster. That was it. Now, one other last thing here before we finish, and I'm surprised I did this quickly, talking kind of fast. Like hours. The summary actually go pretty good. So anyway, I want to bring up something else. There's more to the story. I mean, those are, management policy, procedural things here, but it's also what's the human factor? Why did somebody not care? Okay, because ultimately that's it. There's no way to prove that, but there's evidence of that. Now, just listen to this. February 2nd, 1927, at the Marquette County Coroner's inquest into the deaths of the Barnes-Hecker mine, William Conabero, CCI safety inspector at the Barnes-Hecker mine, he was one of the people that got there that afternoon. He went over to the Morris Lloyd mine, that escape route that was supposedly there. They recovered the bodies of 7 men over there. And he was there when they recovered, I think, the first 5. They had got washed down through the mine and went through, and they actually recovered some of the bodies. Okay, and here's what the question was. Just state to us the names of the men who